Circuit Court for Butch County, Tennessee is now in session. The Honorable Judge of the Court of Criminal Appeals, Timothy Easter, presiding.
Thank you. You may be seated. Good afternoon. Bailiff, will you please call the case?
Yes, Your Honor. Count of today's case is Carden Carroll versus the City of Hockeytown, Tennessee, number 17-CV-290.
Thank you. Are there any preliminary matters?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff also has some preliminary matters.
Let me hear from the plaintiff first. What are your preliminary matters?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Mackenzie Barnes, and along with my co-counsel, we represent the plaintiff, Carden Carroll, in this matter. May my co-counsel pass forward copies of the stipulations for Your Honor and the jurors?
Absolutely. You may hand them to the court officer.
Can I just make sure they're unmarked? Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And pursuant to Competition Rule 33, we ask that the stipulations be admitted into evidence at this point.
Granted. Admitted.
Thank you. As I mentioned, my name is Mackenzie Barnes. I will be delivering the opening statement, direct examining Sky Sylvester, and cross-examining Excelsior Swaggerite. May my co-counsel make introductions?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Paige Nielsen. I will be direct examining Lee Joe and cross-examining Jordan Quinn.
Did you say Ms. Nielsen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Gabriela Perez. I will be direct examining Carden Carroll, cross-examining Sammy Sneed, and delivering the closing argument.
Thank you, Ms. Perez.
And may our witnesses make introductions as well?
Yes.
My name is Anna Albrecht, and I am Carden Carroll.
My name is Lauren Moore, and I'm Paige Joe. Good evening. My name is Kusha Salati, and I am Sky Sylvester.
As you can see, Your Honor, the parties have stipulated to a number of issues in this case, including the authenticity of all exhibits, which are pre-marked as A through J. We would also like to bring to the court's attention that Competition Rule 17 permits bench conferences, but requires that they take place in open court, so the jurors are only constructively absent. And we will request bench conferences throughout the trial as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes.
Also, according to Rule 15, any motions that are not already included in the case materials are prohibited. In this case, that we are excluding any defense motion for a directed verdict. Competition Rule 6 prohibits voir dire, including in the examination of expert witnesses, so questions regarding a witness's credibility must be saved for cross-examination. Also, at this point, I would respectfully request that we be allowed to reserve up to 1 minute of our time for closing argument for rebuttal.
Granted.
And we will ask before approaching the bench or handing exhibits to the bailiff, but may we move freely about the courtroom otherwise?
Granted.
Also, in the interest of time, we ask that all of the witnesses be sworn in at once before the start of the trial.
We'll take that up in just a moment.
Thank you, and that is all, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes. For the defense.
May I introduce myself and co-counsel, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, my name is Luke Worsham, and along with Ella Sego.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Josiah Burns.
Good evening, Your Honor.
We represent the City of Hockeytown, who is represented today by City Manager Excelsior Swaggerite.
Good evening.
In addition to Mr. Swaggerite, we'll call two other witnesses, Ms. Jordan Quinn and Mr. Sammy Sneed.
You may be seated.
Additionally, Your Honor, we would like to direct the court's attention to stipulation number 12. Today's case is bifurcated and covers only issues of negligence and liability. As to extent of damages, that will be handled at a later date, and the defense is ready for trial.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, counselors. Would all who will be testifying in this case please stand and be sworn by the bailiff?
Yeah.
Right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you will give today will be in accordance with the rules of competition.
Thank you. You may be seated. Let's see. Ms. Barnes, you ready with your opening statement, ma'am?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
That was 10 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. And seconds hold so much potential. Now, granted, the 10 that you just witnessed were rather uneventful. But add 2 conflicting protest groups to those 10 seconds. Add 1,000 angry protesters to those 10 seconds. Remove all police officers, remove all medical personnel. Shroud those seconds in the darkness of a total solar eclipse, and then turn the lights off. And then, ladies and gentlemen, triple it. 30 seconds. A matter of seconds, and things aren't so uneventful anymore. In the case of Cardin Carroll, seconds were life-changing when her own city, Hockeytown, Tennessee, turned a blind eye to the danger that she faced and allowed her to suffer. Good evening. My name is Mackenzie Barnes, and along with co-counsel Gabby Perez and Paige Nielsen, we represent the plaintiff, Cardin Carroll, in this matter. Now, first, we will call Ms. Carroll before you, who will tell you that as an avid hockey fan and engaged citizen of Hockeytown, Tennessee, she was concerned by the presence of a Michael Jordan statue displayed prominently in one of her town's parks. Cardin Carroll will tell you that she decided to plan and organize a peaceful demonstration to take place on August 21st, coinciding with the day of the solar eclipse, in order to encourage her city to erect a monument that would celebrate hockey. Cardin Carroll will also tell you that she submitted an application for a special event permit to Excelsior Swaggerite, Hockeytown city manager, indicating with complete candor the time, purpose, and location of her event. Furthermore, when Cardin Carroll was informed that there was a counter-protest on the rise, she took further care in this process by calling Excelsior Swaggerite, again, Hockeytown city manager, and informing him that there was a great potential for conflict between Ms. Carroll's group and that of the counter-protesters. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to pay careful attention to this testimony when you hear it in trial, as I believe it will be uncontroverted. And so, having been assured by the city manager that her protest would be safe, she proceeded with the event. So let's talk about that day, August 21st, around noon. Cardin Carroll arrived to Center Park, her protest location, to set up for the event. But the proof will show that the city of Hockeytown had already turned a blind eye, as Center Park was devoid of police officers, medical services, even electricity to power the streetlights. All had been diverted 2 blocks away to Center Square, the location of the city-sponsored Eclipse Day festivities, which were anticipated to be highly lucrative for Hockeytown. 2:00 p.m. The once empty Center Park is now filled with 1,000 protesters. And as the addition of counter-protesters heightens tensions, the need for protection and intervention only grows. But still, no police officers, no medical services, no streetlights. 2:30 p.m. The eclipse reaches totality and the protest is shrouded in darkness. And still, 1,000 protesters, complete darkness. There are no police officers, no medical services, no streetlights. 2:31 p.m., just seconds later. The sun emerges, the scene brightens, and Cardin Carroll is found lying on the ground, unconscious and injured. Lee Joe, Hockeytown resident and local barista, will tell you that she found Ms. Carroll in this state and called 911 3 times and then was forced to wait over an hour for help to arrive. Safety engineer Sky Sylvester will tell you that based on the information she reviewed, the city of Hockeytown was negligent in not providing adequate amounts of security, lighting, or medical personnel to Center Park on the day in question. Now, foreseeability is the key element to be considered today. And as the plaintiff, we will prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not, that the city of Hockeytown could have reasonably foreseen that dangerous or harmful acts were likely to occur at Center Park, and that although they had a duty to provide adequate protection to their citizens, to provide adequate protection to Ms. Carroll, they didn't. And the plaintiff suffered because of that negligence, because of that willful ignorance, because the city of Hockeytown turned a blind eye. We ask that you consider the evidence and render a verdict in favor of the plaintiff. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Burns?
Yes, Your Honor. I want to talk about some things that Ms. Barnes didn't think were necessary to mention just then. What if I told you that prior to August 21st, the Plaintiff's Protest Club had been involved in a completely different protest? What if I told you that as a result, there were several injuries at this protest? What if I told you that knowing this,
The plaintiff came to the protest on August 21st expecting it to turn violent again. What if I told you that Miss Carroll brought a rope with her that day? What if I told you that when things started to get out of hand, she took that rope in her hand and she lassoed a statue and attempted to pull it to the ground? I'm not going to tell you any of those things today because the evidence clearly will. Today, the plaintiff is trying to lay the blame for Miss Carroll's injuries on the city of Hockeytown. And while we are not here today to make light of those injuries, when someone decides to hire lawyers, file a lawsuit, and go to court, it becomes our responsibility to take a hard look at both sides to try to discover who was in the better position to avoid the injuries. When you do this, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, remember this. When looking for who started the fire, all you have to do is find out who threw that match. Today's case comes down to two questions. First, did the city of Hockeytown make reasonable decisions based on the information they had? And second, did Miss Carroll's own actions lead to her own injuries? And today, if the plaintiff cannot prove to you that the answer to both of these questions is no, then the law says that you cannot find the city of Hockeytown liable. So let's start with the first question. Did the city of Hockeytown make reasonable decisions based on the information they had? Today you're going to hear from the city manager of Hockeytown. He will tell you how Hockeytown is not a large, bustling metropolis. We are a small town. And because of that, when he took his job in early 2017, he had an enormous task ahead of him, because that was the year of the once-in-a-lifetime solar eclipse. Thousands upon thousands of people from all across the country were going to travel to Hockeytown to witness it. So the city manager got right to work. And he went all across the state meeting with vendors and schools and event coordinators. He even began discussing with the chief of police and the streets department, the utilities department, trying to prepare for the impending crowds. But just 2 weeks before August 21st, he received 2 permit applications across his desk, both of which requested permission to host an event on August 21st in Hockeytown. This is a key point in today's case. For while the city manager approved both, we now know the information found in these documents was false at best and deceitful at worst. But the city manager still made completely reasonable decisions. But today you won't just have to take his word for it, because today you'll also hear from an expert who will explain to you how city administration doesn't happen in a bubble. It happens in the real world with real variables. And due to this and the impending crowds coming in Hockeytown and the city's limited resources, the city manager not only made reasonable decisions, but that they met specific industry requirements. So this brings us to our second question. Did Miss Carroll cause her own injuries? Today you'll hear from a reporter who will tell you how before the protest on August 21st, she was no stranger to violent protests. And how on August 21st, when things started to get out of hand, Miss Carroll chose to act dangerously. Today, the plaintiff will completely fail to meet their burden of proof. And that is because if you think of this case as a giant fire, all you have to do is look for who threw the matches. And in today's case, the evidence provided will not place those matches in the hands of the city, but will place them in the hands of Miss Cardin Carroll. And for that reason, we ask that you find in favor of the city of Hockeytown. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Plaintiffs, call your first witness, please.
The plaintiff calls Cardin Carroll to the stand.
Ms. Carroll, I remind you, you're still under oath. Are you under oath?
Please state your name for the court.
Cardin Carroll.
And why are you here today, Ms. Carroll?
I'm suing the city of Hockeytown for negligence surrounding my protest on
Will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a third-year law student, and I love hockey.
Tell us about your experience in law school.
Sure. I've worked hard in my studies. I'm a member of the Order of the Coif, which is a legal honor society that recognizes students in the top 10% of their class. I also have a job lined up with a very prestigious law firm in Tennessee.
And you also mentioned loving hockey. Will you describe that?
Yes, hockey is my favorite sport. I'm a member of the Tennessee chapter of Catfish, which is a booster organization for the Nash Vegas Catfish hockey team. It's a great team, by the way. Hockey it takes immense skill, and you have to skate on this thin metal blade, and it's incredibly impressive, and I just love it.
So you mentioned that you're here suing the city for negligence. What exactly happened?
Well, on August 21st, 2017, the day of the solar eclipse and my protest, the counter-protest got way out of hand, and I ended up severely injured. The city of Hockeytown did not have a police presence at my protest, or medical personnel, or lighting when the solar eclipse reached totality, when it becomes completely dark. And they allowed a counter-protest to come on the same day at the same time as our protest.
So let's circle back and get some details about your protest. What were you planning it for?
Well, as I said, I'm a third-year law student, and I go to the University of Eagles. And that's right by this park called Center Park. And in the middle of Center Park is the Michael Jordan statue. And as I've said, I love hockey, and I'm not a particular fan of basketball. And I just don't think it really makes sense for a basketball player like Michael Jordan to be honored in the middle of Center Park when we live in a town called Hockeytown. I feel like a hockey legend like Wayne Gretzky should be honored.
So how did you go about planning this protest?
Well, I knew the city needed to have prior knowledge of the event, so I submitted a permit application to the city, and I got it approved about a week after.
I'm showing opposing counsel a copy of Exhibit I.
That's fine.
And I have a copy for the witness. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, this is my application for special event permit.
And where did you get the template for this document?
City Hall.
And who did you submit it to?
The city manager, Excelsior Spyway.
Was this document approved?
Yes,
By whom?
the city manager, Excelsior Spyway.
Your Honor, at this time, I ask that Exhibit I be admitted into evidence and published to yourself and the jury.
Any objection? No, Your Honor. Without objection, mark and enter. Exhibit I.
Now, what did you list as your event name on your permit?
Protest at Michael Jordan statue.
And where is the Michael Jordan statue?
In Center Park.
And what did you list as your event location?
123 Gator Street, Hockeytown, Penn.
Would you like to address the location?
Yes, on this permit application, I put 123 Gator Street, and the Michael Jordan statue is in Center Park, which is on 123 Gator Avenue. And you see, when I drive past it all the time, I don't necessarily look at the street sign, and I really only focus on the 123 Gator because that's like the essence of the address. I don't necessarily look so much at the street or the avenue. And on the application, I accidentally mixed the two up. But I think since I put protest at Michael Jordan statue, which there's only one that I know of in the town, and that's at Center Park at 123 Gator Avenue, I think it's clear that I would be having my protest there.
And what did you list as your anticipated number of attendees?
200.
And was that meant to be an exact number?
No, with protests and public events like that, it's hard to get an exact number, so I wasn't entirely sure.
And what did the city ask for in that blank? Did you do anything else to prepare for your protest?
Yes, I put around 100 flyers around town promoting the event.
I'm showing opposing counsel a copy of Exhibit A.
Any objection, Mr. Worcester?
To the witness being handed the exhibit?
To the exhibit.
Oh, no, Your Honor.
And can you identify this document?
Yes, this is one of the posters I put around town.
Did you create this document?
Yes,
And is this an accurate reflection of the document that you created?
it is.
Your Honor, at this time, I ask that Exhibit A be admitted into evidence and published to the jury.
Without objection, mark and enter. Exhibit A.
Now, what did you include on your poster as the event location?
Center Park.
And on the day of the protest, where did people show up?
Center Park.
Did you do anything else in preparation for your protest?
As I was putting up these posters, I found out that a counter protest would be counter protesting our protest, and I knew them to be, I knew which group it was, the Airnest Fan Club, and they're a group that just loves basketball, and their leader is Taylor Target, who I know personally, and they're just a rowdy, violent group, and I was afraid that if they showed up at our protest would become unsafe, and I really wanted our protest to be as safe as possible. So I wanted to warn the city manager.
And how did you go about doing that?
I called the city manager.
Did you call the city manager's number?
Yes.
And what was your topic?
Business surrounding our protest.
And what was your intention when you called the city manager?
I called to warn him about the potential for conflict between the two groups.
And what did the city manager say in response?
Objection. Hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may, this is an admission by party opponent. That's hearsay exception 803 1.2.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, under Rule 803 1.2, in order for an agent of a party to be considered a party opponent under the hearsay exception, three things must be met. First, it must be proven that that it is indeed an agent of the party. Second, that the person was speaking within the scope of their agency. And third, that the statement goes against the party's own interests. While we don't deny the fact that Mr. Swagright is an agent of the defense, and that this statement was taken within the scope of his agency, there's no way that this witness can prove that the statement was against the party's own interests.
Your Honor, if I may respond, I believe opposing counsel is referring to subsection D of this rule. Subsection A states that the statement offered against a party is the party's own statement in either an individual representative capacity, and this rule is connected with or clauses. It needs to be A or B or C or D. And since Excelsior Swaggerite is here as the representative of the city, that fulfills Section A.
Your Honor, Section A of 803 1.2 deals with the party specifically. For instance, if someone is the defendant in a criminal trial, statements that that person said. However, the city of Honkytown is not a person and cannot give statements in this manner. Therefore, D has to apply since Mr. Swagright is an agent of the party.
Heard enough. Overruled. Man.
Thank you, Your Honor. So what did Excelsior Swaggerite tell you when you called to warn him?
He said there would be no problem and that everything was under control.
Is that the way things happened on the day of your protest?
Not at all.
So what happened on the day of your protest?
Well, I got there around 12 noon to start setting up for the protest, and people started trickling in. The weather was really nice, and I was just very excited.
Did those counter-protesters ever come?
Yes, they did.
And when they came, did you see any police officers?
No.
Did you see any medical personnel?
No, I did not.
So what happened when the counter-protesters arrived?
Well, they were very rowdy and loud, and they were screaming these horrible insults at everyone, and specifically at me. They were calling me Ice Queen and other very demeaning terms. It was all just very chaotic.
And who was causing that chaos?
The Michael Jordan fans.
So what happened next?
Well, one of my friends threw a sheet over the Michael Jordan statue, and I ended up trying to pull it down.
Did you actually pull the statue down?
Definitely not.
Did the statue topple and hurt anybody?
No.
And what do you remember after you were tugging on the statue?
Well, I looked over and I saw Taylor Target, the leader of the Airnest Fan Club, running at me with this giant flashlight raised in his hand, and he was screaming angrily, and it looked like he was about to hit me.
And what happened after that?
Well, the sky blacked out with the total eclipse, and I blacked out.
When the sky blacked out, were you able to see because of streetlights?
No.
So were you able to defend yourself?
No, I wasn't.
And after you blacked out, what's the next thing you remember?
I woke up in the hospital.
What were you being treated for while you were in the hospital?
A severe concussion.
Objection, lack of personal knowledge.
Your Honor, I believe the witness would have personal knowledge of what she was being treated for during a stay in the hospital.
Your Honor, if the witness does have personal knowledge of this, it would be through being told that by a physician. And if that is indeed how this witness has personal knowledge, I would change my objection to hearsay.
Overruled. Man.
So what were you being treated for in the hospital?
A severe concussion and a brain bleed.
Do you suffer symptoms from those?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Your Honor, if I may, although opposing counsel did point out that in the stipulations damages are not to be concerned, injuries are not prohibited. Damages are the financial reparations that the court might give to Ms. Carroll. However, in part of our applicable law and burden of proof, we must prove that Carroll suffered injuries based on the negligence of the city. So this goes to the injuries that she did suffer.
What was your question again, please?
Do you suffer symptoms from your injuries?
May I respond, Your Honor? Your Honor, the four elements of negligence are duty, breach, cause, and damages. We don't dispute the fact that opposing counsel is able to ask questions about damages. However, when it comes to the extent of damages, that is for a later date. Ms. Carroll has already testified that she suffered a brain bleed and a concussion. Whether or not she still suffers from things today or how has it affected her in life, that goes to extent of damages and is not relevant for today's trial.
Sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Motion to strike. Any answer so far?
I don't recall anything that she said.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor. But I may be my short-term memory. It's not very good. Go ahead.
So, in the occurrence of the protest, and did you ever see any police officers at the scene? No. And did you ever, throughout the whole thing, see any medical personnel? No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination. Before I begin, may I set up the exhibit? Yes, sir. I'm going to show it to opposing counsel first. I believe it's already better.
May I just reposition myself so that I can see the exhibit? Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Carroll, you're a big fan of the sport of hockey.
Yes, I am.
In fact, once you realized that you were in your third year of law school and graduating Order of the Coin, you decided to spend even more time than normal devoted to hockey.
I did.
And because you like hockey so much, you didn't like the fact that there was a Michael Jordan statue in Center Park.
Yes, that's true.
In fact, Ms. Carroll, because you didn't like that statue, you decided to host a protest.
I did.
A protest where you wanted to show the city of Hockeytown who really deserved the statue.
Yes,
And so you went about the legal process of applying to host your protest.
I did.
You submitted an application to the city, and that application was approved.
Yes, it was.
I want to go through some of the elements of your application. For the record, I'm referencing Exhibit I. Ms. Carroll, first I want to start with the date. The date you chose for your protest was August 21st, 2017.
Yes, that's true.
And as you said in your direct, that's Wayne Gretzky's birthday.
I don't believe I said it in direct, but it is Wayne Gretzky's birthday.
Well, regardless, Ms. Carroll, it was also the day of the long-awaited solar eclipse.
Yes, just so happened.
And when you planned this protest, Ms. Carroll, you knew that a total solar eclipse attracts a lot of tourists.
Sure.
You knew that more people than usual would be in Hockeytown on August the 21st.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. Whether or not Ms. Carroll knew that people would be coming to Hockeytown to watch the eclipse makes no difference in how she filed her permit or the actions that the city took.
Response, Your Honor?
Overruled. Go ahead.
And that was the day you chose for your protest, August 21st.
Yes, it was very important to me because Wayne Gretzky is my hockey hero.
You chose Eclipse Day to show the city who really deserved a statue.
Yes.
Now, Ms. Carroll, you also, for event location, put 123 Gator Street, correct?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Carroll, when you filled out this application, you knew it would be important to provide the city with accurate information.
Yes, that's true.
Because you knew that the city would be relying on the information you provided them to keep the citizens safe. And Ms. Carroll, 123 Gator Street, it's not where you hosted your protest.
No, it's not. But as I stated on direct, I did put protest at Michael Jordan's statue, and with it being at 123 Gator Avenue, I think it's very clear where my protest would be occurring.
Well, I appreciate that answer, Ms. Carroll, but my question wasn't whether you gave the city enough notice. My question was, is 123 Gator Street where you held your protest?
No.
Now, Ms. Carroll, you also, for anticipated number of attendees, put 200.
Yes, that's true.
5 times that amount of people is what actually showed up to the protest.
Yes.
Over 1,000 people were actually at Center Park.
Yes, that's true.
Now, Ms. Carroll, I want to talk about the actual day of your event, August the 21st, 2017. You arrived at Center Park at noon.
Yes, I did.
Your protest was slated to start at 2 p.m.
Yes.
Shortly after 2 p.m., that's when these counter-protesters arrived.
Yes, around the time of the eclipse.
Now, these counter-protesters, as you mentioned earlier, have a history of violence.
Yes, they do.
Violence specifically toward your catfish club.
Yes.
Because just a year prior, your catfish club was involved in another violent interaction with this counter-protest group.
Yes, I believe that's
with
true.
the Airness fan club.
Yes.
But you decided to show up to the protest anyway.
Well, I told the city manager what would happen and that there was potential for conflict, and he told me that there would be no problem, so I assumed it was all right for me to continue.
So you did show up anyway?
Yes, I did.
Showed up ready to show the city who really deserved the statue?
Yes.
Miss Carroll, as time went on and the eclipse got closer to full totality, a friend of yours threw a black tarp over the Michael Jordan statue.
Yes.
Right about that time, Miss Carroll, you looked around to see if there were any police nearby.
Yes.
You didn't see it.
No, I did not.
And that's when you reached down and picked up a rope.
I mean, they weren't directly connected, but yes.
You did pick up a rope after that?
I found it in my hand. I wasn't, consciously doing it, but yes.
You found it in your hand.
Yes.
So it was handed to you, you picked it up.
Either or.
You don't remember?
The whole entire scene was very hectic with all that was going on.
Well, however the rope ended up in your hand, Miss Carroll, you then took that rope and tied it around the Michael Jordan statue.
Yes.
Then you grabbed the rope and started to pull on that statue.
Yes, I did.
You tried to pull the statue down.
I did. It did not actually fall down, and no one was harmed.
But Miss Carroll, as you're standing there pulling down the Michael Jordan statue, these counter-protesters, the Violent Airness fan club, they're still there, right?
Yes, they are.
You mentioned that these guys are big basketball fans, very passionate about Michael Jordan.
Yes,
And they're watching as you're pulling down a statue of their idol.
that's true.
And it was after that that you say the leader of this counter-protest group sprinted towards you with a flashlight in his hand.
Yes, that's true, but if you're insinuating that my injuries were my own fault, I would disagree.
Well, that's nice, Miss Carroll, but what I asked was that after you started pulling on the statue was when the counter-protest leader walked towards you with a flashlight.
Ran toward me, yes.
And Miss Carroll, when you tied the rope around the Michael Jordan statue, that was a decision that you made.
Yes, it was. It was a reaction to everything that was going on.
And when you started to pull on that Michael Jordan statue with violent counter-protesters in the wings, that was a decision that Carden Carroll made.
Yes, I did pull on it. It was more subconscious and just very fast moving.
The city of Hockeytown didn't force you to make those decisions, did it?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The city of Hockeytown did not force you to make those decisions.
Force me? Is that what you said?
Did the city of Hockeytown make you pull down the Michael Jordan statue?
No, they did not.
No further questions.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. You were asked whether or not the city of Hockeytown made you pull down the statue. Why did you try to pull on the statue?
Well, without the lack of police and everything, and with the Michael Jordan fans screaming at us, everything just got very hectic, and it was just my reaction in the moment.
And had there been police, who would have provided them?
The city.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Perez. Any recross? Thank you, sir. Ma'am, you may step down. Plaintiffs, call your next witness, please. Fine. Mr. Nelson.
The plaintiff calls Lee Joe to the stand.
Ms. Joe, I remind you, you're under oath, ma'am. Ms. Nielsen, you may proceed.
Will you state your name for the court?
Hey y'all, my name's Lee Joe, and people at the coffee shop call me Lee Cup Joe because I just love coffee. That's the reason these parties
Will you tell us what your exact occupation is?
Yes, ma'am, as I just said, I'm a barista at the University of Eagles coffee shop, but my true passion lies in being a master roaster right now, an apprentice, and I'm just real excited about it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that background?
Yes, ma'am. Honestly, I've loved coffee since I was a wee tot. It all starts from the story when I was in the force and it basically saved my life, but we don't have enough time for that right now, so I'm just saying I'm working on a latte and I just have a big dream for all my coffee aspirations.
On the day of August 21st, 2017, where were you?
I was working at the coffee shop. I was supposed to be there that day, but colleague called in sick, so that's why I was there that day.
Did you ever go outside to view the eclipse?
Yes, ma'am. The people at the coffee shop were real nice and gave me a nice 5-minute break to go see the eclipse, so I stepped on out around 2:29 p.m. I almost missed it, but I didn't, thank goodness.
Where did you go to view the eclipse?
I went right outside the coffee shop, which is in Center Park, so that's where I viewed the eclipse that day.
While you were in Center Park, what observations did you make of the scene there?
Well, Ms. Nielsen, it was real crowded in the park. It was the most full I'd ever seen it. And when I was trying to look up at the eclipse, I was really distracted from the beautifulness of the eclipse by a real loud ruckus going on in the park.
Can you tell us more about that scene?
Yes, ma'am. It was real rowdy and people were shouting and very angry, and I heard people yelling, threatening things like, "You'll pay for this," and I was really shaken by it. I didn't know what was going on in that park that day.
So after the eclipse and observing that rowdy scene, what happened?
Well, after the eclipse, and it was just so beautiful, I looked back down and I just saw a woman laying unconscious on the ground. There was no one around helping her.
At the time, were you able to identify this woman?
At the time, I didn't know who it was, but her name's Carmen Carroll. She's sitting right over there in the shirt with the, little hair tied up, real cute like.
Let the record reflect that this witness has identified Carden Carroll correctly.
Let the record so reflect.
So when you saw Carden Carroll lying on the ground unconscious, what did you do?
Well, I first ran around the park to find help. I looked for some police officers or medical personnel. I'm just a barista, so I can't, give her some medical treatment she needed, but there was no one in that park. I ran all around it.
So after not finding police officers or medical personnel, did you take any action to help Miss Carroll?
Yes, ma'am. I went back to Miss Carroll and I called 911.
What happened when you called 911?
Well, I called 911 a couple times that day, but the first time I was hung up on.
So after being hung up on the first time, did you call again?
Yes, ma'am. She really needed help, so I dialed 911 again.
What happened when you called the second time?
I was outraged. I was hung up on again.
So after being hung up on not once but twice, did you call again?
Yes, ma'am. By this time, I was getting real fed up with them, but I called again because she really needed help.
And on the third call, what happened?
Well, I don't know if the ER people didn't know how to work their cellular devices or whatnot, but they tried to put me on hold, but they obviously didn't because I could hear everything they were talking about.
Were they talking about your call?
No, ma'am, they weren't talking about anything related to their business. They were just gossiping, and I was shocked. There was a woman lying unconscious on the ground, and they were talking about Kylie Kardashian.
So eventually, after they had gossiped, did the dispatchers ever get to your call?
Yes, ma'am, they eventually decided to take my call seriously.
So when they took your call seriously, was there an ambulance on the way?
I guess they eventually sent it, but it arrived over an hour later.
Objection, Your Honor. I have a 4-3 objection. May I briefly declare construction?
Yes, ma'am. Jury steps out. Jury's out. Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, this line of questioning is unfairly prejudicial, though it may be relevant for a breach of duty. Nonetheless, the jury is going to be far too inclined to take the 1-hour length of time that the ambulance took to arrive to Ms. Carden Carroll and attach it to some further extension damages. Counsel is not going to be calling an expert who can tell us that the length of time further injured Carden Carroll. Therefore, the probative value is far outweighed by the prejudicial effect of this line of questioning.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, the probative value of this testimony greatly outweighs any possible danger of unfair prejudice. The 1-hour time between when this witness, Lee Joe, called 911 and when the ambulance arrived is significant and goes to the injuries that Carden Carroll sustained. We are not going to try to prove further extent of damages, so it does not go under previous objections that opposing counsel has made. But this extent of time goes to the overall process that happened on that day, and it shows, once again, the failure of the city to properly plan for this event because the dispatchers were not ready to respond.
Ms. Seago, you said this was a 404B objection? Oh, okay. All right. I see. You have any response?
Yes, Your Honor. As she said, broken out the volume of extent damage, it's still very precious as the jury to be inclined to think that there were further extent damages, despite any probative value as it may bear to the further.
So the testimony you're objecting to is this witness is testifying that it took an ambulance an hour to get there?
May I respond briefly, Your Honor?
I'm ready to rule. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may answer. Bring the jury back. Okay.
So, Ms. Joe, how long did it take for the ambulance to arrive?
It took the ambulance over an hour, which I thought was real shocking. I called them and said a woman's laying unconscious, and they just took their sweet old time coming on over to the park to help her.
And during that time, between when you called for the third time and finally got an ambulance to come, and when the ambulance finally came over an hour later, did you observe anything else?
Well, around the time that the ambulance came, so around an hour later, a police officer finally did come to the scene.
And that was right before the ambulance?
Yes, ma'am, so around an hour later.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Ms. Seago?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Miss Joe, you were working on the day of the eclipse, as you said before.
Yes, ma'am, I was.
You were working at the coffee shop, which is right next to Center Park.
Yes, I was.
And Center Park is where the Michael Jordan statue is, right?
Yes, ma'am, it is. It's right big, right in the middle of it.
And when you were working on that day, you looked up at the clock and it said 2:29 p.m.
Yes, ma'am, and I was shocked. The eclipse started at 2:30 and I almost missed it, but I ran out and I saw it real quick like.
You ran outside because you didn't want to miss it, and when you got out there, you see that there are crowds of people everywhere.
Yes, ma'am, it was the most full I've ever seen a park that day.
And these people are especially concentrated by the Michael Jordan statue. Isn't that true?
It appeared that way.
And these people were being loud and rowdy.
Yes, ma'am, it was real loud and rowdy. It just seemed real violent-like.
And out of the commotion, you hear one distinct voice yell, "You'll pay for this!"
Yes, it was real loud, very low, and it just seemed real threatening, so it just really stuck in my mind that day.
And Miss Joe, you can't tell us today who said that.
No, I can't, but I just know it was real threatening, like it came from the area that Miss Carroll came from.
You don't know who said it.
No, not exactly who, no, ma'am.
And after you hear this voice yell it, you watch the eclipse. And after that, you look over and the crowds of people are still there.
Yes, ma'am, they were still around the Michael Jordan statue.
Still concentrated, still yelling, still making a commotion.
Yes, ma'am.
You see that, so you go over there, you go over there, and when you get there, you notice that there's someone lying on the ground.
Yes, ma'am, I saw Miss Carroll lying on the ground unconscious.
But you can't tell us today what happened to Cardin Carroll.
No, ma'am, I was looking up at the eclipse, and when I looked down, that's when I saw Miss Carroll.
You can't tell us what Cardin Carroll was doing before she was injured.
No, ma'am, as I said before the eclipse, I was working in the coffee shop, taking my lodging recipe. It's real good, don't try sometimes.
You just don't know.
No, ma'am, I know.
No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Seago. Redirect.
Briefly, Your Honor. Miss Joe, what do you know?
Well, Miss Nielsen, I know that I saw Miss Carroll lying on the ground for over an hour. I know that I took at least 2 calls for 911 to take my call seriously. And I know that the police officer didn't show up for at least another hour, which I thought was real frightening that the city wasn't taking this case real seriously.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Recross, Ms. Seago. Anything else? No, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. You may step down, Ms. Joe. Ms. Barnes, call your next witness, please, ma'am.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Sky Sylvester.
I remind you, ma'am, that you are under oath.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Barnes, you may ask.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Sky Sylvester.
And what is it you do for a living, Miss Sylvester?
I'm a professional safety engineer.
Have you ever testified in court before?
Yes, I have, many times.
Do you have a CV that you use on such occasions?
I do.
Your Honor, I'm showing opposing counsel a document of a previously marked as Exhibit C. May I offer the witness a copy?
Yes.
Can you identify this document, please, Ms. Sylvester?
Yes, this is my CV.
Is it an accurate depiction of your skills, training, expertise, and experience?
Yes, it is.
And has it been altered in any way since you created it?
No, it hasn't.
At this time, I ask that Exhibit C be admitted into evidence and published to the jury.
Without objection? Any objection? Mark and enter as the exhibit. What is it, Ms. Barnes, the exhibit number?
Exhibit C.
C?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Sylvester, you mentioned that you are a safety engineer. Will you tell us about the educational background you had to prepare you for that line of work?
I have a bachelor's in industrial engineering from Kimberly State University, and I obtained my master's in safety from the School of Safety and Systems Management at the University of Southern Grace.
So, a master's of safety. Will you tell us specifically some things that you studied there?
I studied safety broadly, but also delved into a couple areas of study more deeply. Those include history and basis of accident prevention, investigation of accidents, human factors, and management of accident prevention plans.
So, investigation of accidents, what does that entail?
Investigation of accidents is exactly what the name implies. Finding out the root cause of an accident, why that accident happened, and then learning how that accident could have been prevented and how to prevent that accident in the future.
And you also mentioned accident prevention planning. Will you tell us about that?
Accident prevention refers to the plans, preparations, or actions taken by an organization to stop or avoid an accident before it happens. Organizations like businesses, factories, governments usually create these types of plans. Governments create these types of plans when hosting public events to ensure the safety of the people attending its event. These plans include the deployment of police officers, the stationing of medical personnel, that sort of thing.
Now, will you tell us about some of the areas of expertise you have that you've gained in your work as a safety engineer?
Yes, for the past 35 years, I've worked as a licensed professional safety engineer consultant. I listed about 35 areas in my CV, including accident prevention planning, accident investigation and accident reconstruction, safety training and supervision, vehicle traffic control, and situations involving warning signs, warning tapes, and warning cones.
Have you ever delivered a seminar or released a publication?
I've actually given a seminar that's content is very pertinent to my investigation. It was a seminar on lighting during eclipse events.
And do you have any professional accreditations?
Yes, I'm a registered professional safety engineer in the state of Tennessee and a member of the American Society of Safety Engineers.
Your Honor, at this time we move to tender Ms. Sylvester as an expert in safety engineering with specific knowledge of accident prevention planning.
Burns, you're not going to object to that, are you?
No objection.
I think so.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, how did you become involved in this case, Ms. Sylvester?
I was contacted by the plaintiff's attorney to do an assessment of the events of August 21st in Hockeytown, Tennessee.
What were your initial steps in the investigation you conducted?
I spoke with the plaintiff's attorney, and then I spoke with the plaintiff herself, Ms. Carter Carroll.
And at the conclusion of your investigation, did you reach an expert opinion?
I concluded that the city failed to provide adequate security, lighting, and medical personnel for the protest events on August 21st, 2017.
Now, after having your conversations with plaintiff and plaintiff's counsel, what did you do?
I tried to contact the city risk manager. I called, I emailed, but I never got a response.
Just to clarify, was this the city risk manager employed by the city of Hockeytown?
Yes, of course.
So after the city risk manager ignored your emails and calls, what did you do?
I actually drove over to Hockeytown, Tennessee to try and speak with the risk manager in person. When I arrived at the risk manager's office, I was told by the administrative assistant, another employee of the city, that the city risk manager refused to speak with me and that I should leave.
Were you able to have a conversation with anyone at the city risk manager's office?
I actually bumped into a safety coordinator for the city of Hockeytown, Tennessee, who told me that the risk manager and city manager had not met to discuss any safety concerns. Also, the risk manager and risk management staff were out of town on the day of the eclipse.
Objection to relevance, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I may, this is going to show the negligence of the city of Hockeytown in planning, organizing, and approving the events that took place on August 21st.
Are you objecting to the testimony that these two safety officials were out of town?
Yes, Your Honor. May I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, like opposing counsel has said, their specific expertise was in planning, organizing the events. If they were out of town on the day, that has nothing to do with planning or organizing, and therefore does not go to the
Sounds like some really good, fertile cross-examination, but I'm going to overrule your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. So if you could continue with your explanation.
Well, as I was saying, the city risk manager and risk management staff were out of town on the day of the eclipse.
Did you speak to any other city employees in the course of your investigation?
I did. I spoke with the police officer in charge of special event staffing, a member of the fire department and emergency medical services, and a member of the streets department, all employees of the city, to learn about the safety of the events on August 21st in regards to security, lighting, and medical personnel. Assessing these three areas would give me a good idea of what steps the city took in ensuring the safety of its citizens.
What did you learn regarding the security on the day in question?
First, there was not a contingency plan of action in case of an emergency due to, say, a weather or a terror situation. Also, the city manager had stated that no police presence was needed outside of Center Square, where the city-sponsored eclipse events occurred. That means that there were no police anywhere else in the city, including Center Park, where the protest events occurred.
And what did you learn regarding lighting on the day in question?
The streetlights surrounding Center Park were off. All electricity from those streetlights had been rerouted to Center Square to power the city's food trucks and sound systems for their event. If those streetlights around Center Park had been turned on during the eclipse, adequate lighting would have been provided for the protests at Center Park, and people still would have been able to view the eclipse properly.
And also you mentioned medical personnel. What did you learn regarding this area of safety?
First, the city did not block off streets for emergency vehicles. Second, the city did not station any medical personnel at Center Park where the protest events occurred.
Did you review any other materials in your investigation?
I did. I reviewed 2 permit applications.
Your Honor, I'm showing opposing counsel a document previously marked as Exhibit J.
Okay.
And I have a copy for the witness.
All right.
Can you identify this document, please, Ms. Sylvester?
Yes, this is one of the applications for a special event permit. This one was submitted by Taylor Target.
And is this an accurate depiction of the one you reviewed in your investigation?
It is.
And did you use the information included in this document in formulating an expert conclusion?
I did.
At this time, we ask that Exhibit J be admitted into evidence and published to the jury.
Any objection to that, Mr. Barnes?
No objection, Your Honor.
Would admit as Exhibit J.
And Ms. Sylvester, do you also have a copy of Exhibit I on the stand?
I do.
Your Honor, please let the record note that that is Exhibit I, Cardin Carroll's application, which has been previously admitted into evidence.
The record so reflect.
Now, you mentioned that you reviewed both of these documents in your investigation. Will you tell us how you reviewed them?
I did a plain reading of both documents. Very simple. I read all of the information on the documents and then made conclusions based on this holistic approach.
What did your plain reading and holistic approach reveal to you about these applications?
They show 4 red flags that should have indicated to the city that there may have been an issue in approving both of these permits.
What was the first of the 4 red flags in these applications?
The event date and time were the same on both applications.
And the second red flag?
The locations of both events were the same. If we look at Exhibit J, one piece of information relates the location, 123 Gator Avenue, Center Park. If we look at Exhibit I, 2 pieces of information relate the location of Cardin Carroll's event, 123 Gator Street and Michael Jordan statue, which is in Center Park on 123 Gator Avenue. Gator Street, Gator Avenue, those are very similar sounding names, but Michael Jordan statue is a distinctive location in Center Park, the same Center Park where Taylor Target's event was supposed to take place.
And the third of the 4 red flags in these applications?
If we look at Exhibit J, we see that an Ernest fan club was holding a family reunion at a rally. That just doesn't make any logical sense.
And finally, the 4th red flag in these applications?
Taylor Target's application is also incomplete. There is no anticipated number of attendees. Now, if the city was concerned about, if the city wanted to clear up any confusion or inconsistency
As it says in the header, additional information may be requested by the city manager prior to submittal for final consideration.
So, Ms. Sylvester, based on all of the interviews you conducted and your review of these two applications, what is your expert conclusion?
In my expert opinion, the city failed to provide adequate security, lighting, and medical personnel for the protest events on August 21st, 2017 in Hockeytown, Tennessee.
Finally, Ms. Sylvester, you mentioned that there were no officers stationed anywhere in Hockeytown except for Center Square. Did you ever discover why the city manager had made this decision?
Yes, the city manager did not want people to think that the town was unsafe or feel paranoid due to a large police presence.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Cross-examination, Mr. Burns.
Mr. Honor, before I begin, I have an aide from co-counsel Stephanie Martin.
Certainly.
And, Your Honor, may I reposition myself?
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Now, Ms. Sylvester, you are here to do a safety evaluation of the events that took place on August 21st. Is that right?
Good evening, and yes, I was.
And in doing this safety evaluation, you reviewed multiple sources, correct?
I did.
You reviewed 2 permit applications,
Yes.
and you spoke to 5 different people. Isn't that right?
Yes.
You talked to a city safety coordinator.
Yes.
You talked to a fire and EMS personnel.
Yes, I did.
You talked to the plaintiff as well as the plaintiff's attorneys.
Yes.
And you also talked to a police officer. Is that right?
Yes, and I also talked to a member of the streets department, so I guess that would make it 6 people.
Okay, so other than these 6 people and these 2 permit applications, you did not review any other sources and reach your conclusion today, did you?
No, I didn't need any other sources.
So you were able to reach a conclusion based on these sources, correct?
Yes, I was.
Now, today you're here and you're testifying as an expert in safety engineering, is that right?
Yes, with specific knowledge in accident prevention.
And now you have over 50 years experience, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
35 years of which have been specifically in consultancy, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and today you provided the court with a copy of your curriculum vitae, is that right?
I did.
And for the record, I'm referencing Exhibit C of the first page. Now, you list, you say professional experience. Underneath it, you say you had 10 years as a bridge and highway engineer, correct?
Yes, this was during the time that I got my bachelor's and before I got my master's degree.
Okay, so if we go back to after your master's degree, you say 12 years, the second page of Exhibit C for the record. You say 12 years as an engineer with the Tennessee Public Utilities Commission, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, but what I'm not going to find anywhere in this curriculum vitae are any positions in city administration, correct?
No, I'm a safety engineer.
There's no positions as a city safety coordinator?
No, of course not. I'm a safety engineer.
You've never been a city manager?
No, I'm a safety engineer.
In fact, Ms. Sylvester, you've never been in a position to directly make decisions for a city. Isn't that right?
No, I'm a safety engineer.
Okay, so now I want to talk about going to the third page of your curriculum vitae. Let the record reflect I'm referring to the third page of Exhibit C, where you list 35 years as a licensed professional safety engineer consultant, and you list multiple areas of expertise, right?
Yes, about 35, give or take.
Okay, and I'm going to read a few of these off. You list construction safety, correct?
Yes.
Cranes safety?
Yes, situations involving the safety of cranes.
Ladder safety?
Yes, the aspects of using a ladder and the safety requirements were involved in that.
Pipeline safety?
Yes.
Okay, the list goes on, but what I'm not going to find in here is any city event safety, am I?
Actually, that does fall under accident prevention planning. As I have stated earlier, governments make accident prevention plans, and that does include plans made for public events.
But all the other things listed on here are very specific, wouldn't you agree with me?
No.
You wouldn't agree with me that in hazardous conditions, creating slipping hazard and tripping hazards is not a specific expertise?
No, tripping hazards can occur anywhere. There are many different places tripping hazards can occur. That's not specific.
So you don't have a specific area of expertise in tripping hazards? Is that what you're telling
No,
us?
I have general expertise in that. I know about the safety in tripping hazards on the streets, in buildings, in factories, in offices, any type of place.
Okay, so all these areas of expertise are just general? Is that what you're telling the jury today?
No, they're broad.
Okay, so you have several broad areas of expertise in accident prevention, correct?
Yes, and any professional in the industry would see that.
Okay, now I want to talk about the method you used in conducting today's case.
Of course.
You reviewed the 2 permit applications, correct?
I did.
And if I may refer to the enlargements at this point, let the record reflect I'm referring to Exhibit J as well as Exhibit I, which have already been submitted into evidence. Now, do you recognize these 2 enlargements?
Yes, I do.
Okay, now I want to look at the first one, which is Exhibit J.
All right.
This was submitted by Mr. Taylor Target to the city, is that right?
Yes, it was.
Wouldn't you agree with me that in the event location line, it says 123 Gator Avenue, Center Park?
Yes,
correct?
that's where the Michael Jordan statue is located.
Okay, now you'd also agree with me that on the location line of Miss Carden Carroll's on Exhibit J, it says 123 Gator Street, Hockeytown at the park, isn't that right?
Yes.
So you agree with me that based on the information given in each of these location lines, that these protests were to be held at 2 different locations, correct?
I cannot in good conscience agree with that because you cannot ignore the rest of the document. You have to look at all aspects of the document to determine the location. And if you look at all aspects of each document, you would see that both of these events were to take place at Center Park.
Okay, so this document was submitted to the city by Miss Carden Carroll, correct?
Yes, it was.
And you're telling the jury today that on this document there's false information?
No.
So 123 Gator Street is the address it was held at?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I misspoke. I meant to say that there is a small mistake on the document, but it's still clear where the location was to be.
Not only was there a small mistake in the event location line, but if we look at the anticipated number of attendees, Ms. Carroll listed 200. Isn't that right?
Yes, she did anticipate it.
And are you aware that over 1,000 showed up at this event?
I don't know the exact number of people who attended Ms. Carroll's event. I do know that she put anticipated, which is a rough estimate. It's not an exact number.
Now, Ms. Sylvester, you've been in court today, correct?
I have.
And did you hear Ms. Carroll testify?
I did.
Did you hear Ms. Carroll testify to over 1,000 people showing up at her event?
I believe so. I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, so now I want to talk about, you believe safety is very important, correct?
Of course.
Especially in public settings, right?
Yes, in any setting.
Okay, and you would agree that safety might be a particular concern if in this public setting there's a large crowd of people, right?
I believe that safety would be a particular concern in any setting involving citizens of a city.
But it would be even a greater concern in a large confined crowd of people, right?
Yes, that's true.
And it would be even more greater if this large crowd of people was violent. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Wouldn't you agree that it would be unsafe for someone in this violent environment to lasso a statue?
I would, but I would also agree that it would be unsafe if the city did not send anyone to monitor that situation.
Now, thank you for that response, but that wasn't my question. I asked you, wouldn't you agree with me that it would be unsafe for someone to lasso a statue in this violent environment? Wouldn't you?
I did agree with you, and I also said that it would also be unsafe if the city did not send anyone to monitor that situation.
But it would be unsafe, correct?
Yes, and it would also be unsafe if the city did not send any police officers to monitor a violent situation.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. Redirect, Ms. Barnes.
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. No, Ms. Sylvester, you were asked on cross-examination if you've ever been in the position to make decisions regarding city safety. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I'm a safety engineer. I'm not a government official. So I would never be in a position to make those decisions. I look at the decisions that public officials make and how
do you have the expertise to evaluate the decisions that are made by cities?
Yes, as you can see in my CV.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect, Mr. Burns?
No recross, Your Honor.
Recross. Thank you. Let me step down, man. Plaintiff, do you have any additional witnesses?
No, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests.
Plaintiff rests. Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Ms. Jordan Quinn to the stand.
Ms. Quinn? Ma'am, I remind you, you are under oath.
May I construct the enlargement, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, as to not interrupt opposing counsel when it happens, when the exhibit is flipped around, may I move to better see the document?
Yes, you may, at any point.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Please tell us your name.
Jordan Quinn,
Ms. Quinn, where do you live?
right here in Hockeytown, Tennessee.
Could you please tell us what you do for a living?
I'm a news reporter for the Channel 7 News in Hockeytown, and I also write a weekly newspaper column called All In with Jordan Quinn.
And what exactly does your role as a news reporter entail?
Well, I go around the city of Hockeytown and visit all the major events and gatherings that take place, and I shoot news stories that are aired in the daily news.
And are you familiar with the events that took place on August 21st, 2017?
Yes, that was a very big day for Hockeytown.
Could you please explain to the jury exactly why it was such a big day?
It was the day of the solar eclipse, and our city had been looking forward to it for several months. There was also a little bit of side talk about a protest and counter-protest happening that day between two local sports clubs.
Did you recognize either of these two sports clubs?
Yes, the two sports clubs were the Tennessee Catbirds Catfish, which supports the Nash Vegas hockey team, and the Ernest Fan Club, which is the basketball.
And had you ever had any past experience with either of these two clubs?
Yes, with the Tennessee Catbirds Catfish, I covered 3 or 4 of their past events.
Okay, and could you please describe these events?
Objection, Your Honor. May we call a constructive bench conference?
Yes.
Your Honor, this testimony will become improper character evidence if this witness is allowed to respond. This witness is going to testify that previously she encountered the Catfish Club at a protest and some injuries resulted. This is improper character evidence because it is being offered to prove action conformity therewith. I'm referring to Rule 404A, Your Honor.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Okay.
Your Honor, also according to that rule, you are allowed to use that testimony for other purposes. We are not offering this testimony to use as action and conformity therewith. Instead, we are using it to prove notice, specific notice of Ms. Carden Carroll herself that her hockey club was violent.
Your Honor, may I respond?
This is an objection under 403.
404A, Your Honor.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, you may respond.
Your Honor, this is proving action conformity therewith because it's discussing a very similar event that occurred in the past. And so it can go to prove action conformity therewith, and it could unfairly prejudice the jury because of that. So it should be excluded first because it is improper character evidence, and second because it is more prejudicial.
Mr. Burns, why did you tell me the defense is wanting to introduce this proof? What's your purpose?
It's for the notice of Ms. Carden Carroll knowing that her hockey club had been violent in the past.
Notice to who?
To Ms. Carden Carroll.
That her hockey club had been violent in the past.
Yes, Your Honor.
Notice to the plaintiff that her hockey club had been, that's the reason you're trying to introduce
Yes,
this.
Your Honor. This would show that Ms. Carroll did have notice that her hockey club was violent in the past. Maybe should have taken different actions than she did on August 21st at the protest.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Carroll is not the one on trial today, Your Honor. Notice to Ms. Carroll is not relevant in this case. What we are here to discuss is the possible negligence of the city. And so notice to the city is relevant. However, notice to Ms. Carroll is not.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, if I may, in this case, one of our theories is that Ms. Carroll was more negligent than the city. In order to prove this, we have to show that she did have notice of these violent tendencies in the past, therefore that we can prove that the city was less negligent and therefore not negligent in today's case.
Was the city aware of her negligence in the past?
Your Honor, there's no proof of that.
I'm going to sustain the objection, find that the probative value is outweighed by the prejudicial effect.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Quinn, you said you've been involved in several past gatherings of this protest club. How many exactly?
3 or 4 different times.
Okay, and being involved with these 3 or 4 different protests, do you know the reputation within the sports community?
Yes, I do.
Could you please tell the jury what that reputation was?
Yes. Over the years, the Tennessee chapter of Catfish has become known as more of a cult-like group of hockey fanatics that outwardly every sport.
Objection, Your Honor. I again renew my objection. This is improper character evidence, as this goes to prior actions that this club took.
Your Honor, we're offering this for reputation within a specific community of an organization, not of a specific witness or character.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
I think she's already answered.
Oh, yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. So, keeping this in mind, could you explain what you were doing on August 21st, 2017?
Yes. In the first part of the day, I was downtown Hockeytown enjoying the Eclipse event, interviewing different people, and then in the last part of the day, closer to the Eclipse, I was getting prepared for my live segment.
Okay, now, just so the jury is clear, where were you at the beginning of the day?
I was right in downtown at Center Stage.
Did you move when you went and positioned yourself in front of your cameraman?
I did. I wanted to separate myself from the very large crowd that was there for the Eclipse, so I went to the outer edge of the square for my live segment.
Okay, and once you stationed yourself in front of your cameraman on the outside of the main square, what happened?
Well, I was getting prepared with my cameraman to shoot my live segment, and just before we were going to go live, something caught my eye, and I looked up in the near distance in Center Park. There were these 2 very large groups of people, and all of a sudden the 2 groups rushed toward one another, and they were screaming and yelling the entire time.
What did you do in response?
I figured this would probably lead to a pretty big news story, so I pulled out my cell phone and took a picture.
Would you recognize this picture if I showed it to you?
Absolutely.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing the opposing counsel a clear and unmarked copy of Exhibit H, and I have a document for the witness. Ms. Quinn, what is this document?
This is the photograph that I took of the protesters in Center Park.
Is it a fair and accurate representation?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I offer the evidence was been pre-marked as Exhibit H.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Your Honor, at this time I'd like to refer to Exhibit H on the enlargement.
You may.
Now, Ms. Quinn, just so the jury understands, what exactly is happening in this picture?
Well, all the people that you can see in the picture gathered around the Michael Jordan statue in the center, and they're all protesting or counter-protesters who are protesting the statue in the center.
Okay, so is this the statue right here in the middle of the picture?
Yes.
Now, just so the jury is clear, what is covering this statue?
It's some sort of tarp or sheet of some sort that I assume one of the 2 groups threw over the statue.
And do you know which group threw this tarp over the statue? Now, just to be clear, was this picture taken before or after the darkness of the eclipse?
Before.
All right, thank you, Ms. Quinn. Now, after you took this picture and you completed your 3-minute segment, what did you do next?
Well, after I finished my segment, I rushed straight to Center Park to start interviewing people who were part of the protest so I could get all the information that I needed for my possible use.
Were you able to attain enough information?
Not really, because when I interviewed people who were part of the protest, all of the stories were very different, and I couldn't get any clear information because everybody was confused at what had happened because it was so chaotic and dark.
Okay, now, Ms. Quinn, were you able to get a clear view of the protest and everything that happened in that protest?
I was.
And how would you describe the protest to the jury members here today?
The protest was complete chaos. People were
rushing toward one another and screaming and yelling, and things were being thrown over the statue and thrown in the air, and just chaos.
Ms. Quinn, the entire time you were interviewing people in the park, did you ever once see anybody injured?
Not at all.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Nielsen.
Hello, Ms. Quinn. My name is Paige Nielsen. I'll be asking you a few questions today. So in the lead up to Eclipse Day, you interviewed over 100 people to get their take on the importance of the eclipse. Isn't that right?
I did.
And while you were interviewing those people, a few were worried over a planned counter-protest and protest at the Michael Jordan statue. Isn't that right?
Yes, there was some talk about the protest that was happening.
So in the days leading up to the eclipse, there were citizens in Hockeytown who were aware of a planned counter-protest and protest for Eclipse Day.
Yes.
And they were aware that it would take place at the Michael Jordan statue.
Yes, I believe.
And they were worried about it? Is that correct?
Some people had concerns about it because there was protest and counter-protest happening.
So some people were worried about it. That's correct?
Yes.
And on the day of the eclipse, you were turned around while the actual eclipse was happening, correct?
Turned around from
You were not facing the Michael Jordan statue while the actual eclipse was occurring, correct?
Well, not completely turned around, no. I was facing in the general direction of Center.
But you were filming your segment, weren't you?
Yes.
And so you did not specifically observe the happenings at the Michael Jordan statue during the eclipse, correct?
Not right during the eclipse.
And so you're not aware of what happened at the Michael Jordan statue exactly during the eclipse. Isn't that right?
No, not during that little bit of darkness.
And previously on direct, you were asked about a photo. And in that photo, it is impossible to tell who is from what group. Isn't that right?
That's right. All of that, the photo was taken after the two groups collided, and so all of the protesters were intermingled.
Right. You observed two groups collide, correct?
Yes.
And that was when the rowdiness started. Isn't that right?
They were already screaming and yelling, and then continued to scream and yell while they rushed toward one another.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. You may step down. Defendants, call your next witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Defense called Sammy Stevenson. May I take a moment to put my microphone?
Yes, you may. Come on up, sir. Just have a seat.
Also, Your Honor, may my co-counsel help me set up some exhibits?
Yes,
or
ma'am.
some enlargements, excuse me.
Seago, you may ask, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Please tell us your name.
My name is Sammy Sneed.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Sneed?
I'm an industrial safety engineer and I specialize in municipal safety planning.
What is municipal safety planning?
My job is to work with municipalities, such as cities and towns, to evaluate whether a planned event complies with industry standards and codes. I also help cities in managing and planning safe public events.
Do you have any degrees?
Yes, I started out with a bachelor's in theatrical arts. Really figured that wasn't my calling, so I moved on to get a master's in industrial safety engineering.
Do you have any certifications?
Yes, I'm a licensed professional engineer and certified safety professional.
Mr. Sneed, can you speak up a little bit? And since the jury has already heard from one expert today, I want you to tell us about your work experience. Could you do that for us, please?
Sure. I've held a number of positions over the past 27 years, all of which have been in either city or safety planning. I've been the assistant or lead city manager in 5 different towns across the country, even in Canada, including my current position.
And what is your current position?
Right now, I'm the assistant city manager of Defuniak Springs, Florida, my hometown. But most of my time is spent doing consulting work for cities during special events.
And have you ever testified as an expert in city safety planning in either a trial or a deposition before?
Yes, absolutely, I have.
Your Honor, at this point, we tender Sammy Sneed as an expert in city safety planning.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, he'll be allowed to give his opinion testimony.
How did you become involved in today's case, Mr. Sneed?
I was asked to evaluate whether the city of Hockeytown acted with reasonable care in issuing 2 special event permits for August of 2017.
And were you able to reach a conclusion?
Yes, I was.
What materials did you review when reaching your conclusion?
I reviewed the pleadings in this case, the statements presented by each witness. I reviewed the 2 permit applications submitted by Cardin Carroll and Taylor Target, and I also consulted the prevailing industry standards that apply to this case.
Now, were these materials sufficient to reach your conclusion?
Yes, they were.
And did you reach your conclusion using reliable principles and methods?
Absolutely.
And did you reach your conclusion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty?
Yes.
Mr. Sneed, what was your conclusion?
I concluded that the city of Hockeytown acted with reasonable care in issuing 2 special event permits for August of 2017, and also that they acted reasonably in diverting law enforcement and emergency personnel to the downtown area during that time.
Mr. Sneed, would it help you explain your conclusion to look at some enlargements of the 2 permit applications?
Absolutely, it would.
Your Honor, may Mr. Sneed join me in the well?
Yes.
May I
you're off
reposition?
mic, though, that you need to speak up.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Ms. Perez?
May I reposition? Thank you.
And let the record reflect that I will be referring to Exhibit I and J, both of which have been entered into evidence. What are we looking at here, Mr. Sneed?
These are the 2 permit applications, Exhibit I being Cardin Carroll's, Exhibit J, Taylor Target's.
Now, as the city is being accused of being negligent when reviewing and approving these applications, I want you to walk us through how the standard review process works for this type of application. Can you do that? Can you do that for us, please?
Absolutely. In reviewing these type of permit applications, there's really 3 components that you have to work for: location, timing, and attendance. The city administrators need to know where an event will be, when it will be, and how many people are expected to attend.
Let's start with that first one, location. What can you tell us about that with these applications in particular?
Well, the 2 applicants was in 2 different locations: Cardin Carroll, 123 Gator Street, Hockeytown, both at the park, and Taylor Target, 123 Gator Avenue, Center Park.
Just for those of us that don't know, is there both a 123 Gator Avenue and 123 Gator Street in Hockeytown?
Yes, there is. And it's not uncommon for a city to use the same word, variations of that word, when naming different streets. Say you're in Atlanta looking for Peachtree, or Nashville looking for Old Hickory, then you know what I'm talking about. And that's why it's so important to put the right suffix when naming the streets. In this case, 123 Gator Street is the location of a small park in a quiet neighborhood, and 123 Gator Avenue is Center Park, where you'll find the Michael Jordan statue.
Now, as the city of Hockeytown is being blamed for not being able to predict what happened between her protest group and Taylor Target's group, do industry standards require a city to investigate potential conflicts in events before issuing event permits?
Yes, absolutely they do. But when it comes to city safety administration, you simply can't make good decisions off of bad information. In this case, the location that city administrators were provided for Cardin Carroll's event was a completely different location than what you wound up showing. They had no reason to believe that Cardin Carroll's true intentions were to go to 123 Gator Avenue.
Now let's talk about the second component of reviewing these applications, the timing. What can you tell us about that?
Well, both applicants was at the same time, August 21st, 2017, from 2 to 4 p.m. More importantly, this is exactly the same time as the solar eclipse.
Why was the solar eclipse event important?
Well, this is what we refer to in my line of work as an unprecedented gathering event. And this is where a massive influx.
Objection, Your Honor.
Grounds?
This is hearsay, although this is an expert witness and under Rule 702 can use hearsay to create his conclusion. He cannot necessarily admit that hearsay if it would otherwise be inadmissible, so he cannot tell us what exactly the industry standard would be.
Overruled.
So after, excuse me, I apologize. Could you please repeat your answer to my question, which was, why is the eclipse event important?
Sure, this is what we refer to as an unprecedented gathering event. This is where a massive influx of people gather in a very concentrated area during the same amount of time. This could be something such as an evacuation, a massive influx of evacuees, a major sporting event, or major concert festival.
And was the city reasonable when they decided to allocate such a high amount of emergency personnel and law enforcement to the solar eclipse event?
Yes, absolutely it was. The city of Hockeytown had never in its history seen crowds of this size.
And why is that? Why were they reasonable in doing so?
Well, it's true the industry code does warn against providing a disproportionate amount of emergency personnel to a particular district, but that same code is an exception for which the city is faced with an unprecedented gathering event. Now, if this were a perfect world and a perfect city, there would be a limited amount of ambulances, police officers, not to mention manpower. But that's simply not a city any of us live in. City administrators simply have to make the best and most reasonable decision with the limited resources that they have.
And why do industry standards allow for cities to allocate such high amounts of personnel resources to unprecedented gathering events?
Just like I said, there's a very limited amount of resources. In this case, the Hockeytown and its administrators need to make the best and most reasonable decision with the resources that they have.
Finally, let's look at the third component of reviewing these permit applications, the expected number of attendees. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Carter Carroll listed 200 as the anticipated number, and Taylor Target simply left that blank.
Let's start right there with Taylor Target's. Is it significant that he left his blank?
Not very. First of all, Mr. Target did list his event as a family reunion, which typically means a small, relatively tame crowd. But really, no matter how large Mr. Target's event would have been or was scheduled to be, it was scheduled to be in a completely different location than Carter Carroll's event.
Now let's look at Cardin Carroll's. Given that she listed 200 as the anticipated number of attendees, was the city reasonable when they decided not to send law enforcement and emergency personnel to her event?
Yes, absolutely. Industry code does not require the city to allocate any law enforcement or emergency personnel to an event so small as 200. But let's just say for the sake of argument that the city had sent emergency personnel of some sort to 123 Gator Street. In this case, it wouldn't have made a difference.
What do you mean it would not have made a difference?
Well, had the city sent law enforcement or emergency personnel of some sort to 123 Gator Street, which is the location that Carter Carroll gave, it would have arrived to a small empty park, whereas Carter Carroll was actually on the other side of town at 123 Gator Avenue.
And why is that significant?
Well, it all comes down to the quality of the information. It's very difficult to make good decisions off of bad information. In this case, when the city administrators were given inaccurate and incomplete information, they simply couldn't do their job.
Thank you, Mr. Seed. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Perez, cross-examination.
Good evening, Mr. Sneed. My name is Gabby Perez. I'll be asking you a few questions. Now, I'd like to begin with a look at your curriculum vitae. You list your phone number as 866 Quick Expert, correct?
Correct. I am working in the consulting business.
And your website is www.gotodefensewitness.us.
Not specifically my website. It's a website that I'm listed on as a witness for cities.
So that is a correct, the website that you listed?
That I am listed on, yes.
Now, in fact, all of your work as an expert witness has been for the defense, right?
Correct. And as a witness for the city, it's oftentimes that cities are being sued, not suing somebody else. So yes, I lined up on the defense.
And let's talk a little bit about your education. You have no education in public safety, correct?
Public safety.
Public safety.
Event administration is public safety. You have to have people.
But your education is in industrial safety, correct?
Right. And any industry is made of people. So I'm really not understanding the public.
Municipal safety, for example.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's your statement that industrial safety is the same thing as municipal safety?
Yes.
All right, now let's talk about your work history. You worked in Panama City Beach for a little bit, right?
I did a while back.
And while you were working there, some allegations.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Your Honor, this goes to the witness's credibility as an expert because he is an expert in city safety planning. His past as a city manager, which is what he worked at in Panama City Beach, would impeach his credibility.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Then in that case, I change my objection to Rule 404. This is improper character evidence. Counsel is using a prior bad act, which is only admissible under Rule 608
and 609. It's only admissible under 608 if it was used to show an incident of untruthfulness, which this was not, and under 609 if it was a conviction of a crime which was penalized with over 1 year, which was also not. Therefore, this is improper character evidence.
May I respond, Your Honor?
I don't know what it is. What was he charged with? Rape or something? What's going on?
May I respond? May I respond?
Well, we need to have a jury out, don't you think?
Yes, Your Honor.
Constructive bench conference, Your Honor.
Jury's out. Okay. Yes.
The testimony that Mr. Sneed can give in response to this is that he ignored, there were some allegations against him that he allegedly ignored warnings from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services about closing beaches for the sake of safety, and that he allegedly dumped public in a different job, allowed for lead to be dumped into the public water source, again concerning safety and city managing.
Yes, ma'am. You want to respond?
And if this is not character evidence, furthermore, this is unfairly prejudicial to the jury. The jury is going to be far too inclined to draw a line between the negligent actions of Mr. Sneed 17 years ago to the negligence of the city of Hockeytown in this case. His negligence 17 years ago is not an issue.
Was he acting in his capacity as some sort of city safety official when he made this call about the sharks?
He was acting as city manager, Your Honor.
Overruled. I'll allow it.
Thank
Jury's
you.
back. Go ahead.
So some allegations were made against you while you worked in Panama City Beach, correct?
Yes, I was going for that.
And so those allegations were that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services warned you about vicious shark attacks and closing beaches, but you allegedly ignored those warnings.
They often warn me and they told me to close the beaches. In this case, I didn't find any consequences.
So that's a yes?
Correct.
And promptly after these were made, you left your job in Panama City Beach.
Right, because at that point, the entire city was against me, even though I stand by my decision as a reasonable decision in the scope that I had and the information that I had.
Right, so after you left Panama City Beach, once allegations were made against you, you moved to West Memphis, Arkansas, right?
Correct.
And once again, in West Memphis, some allegations were made against you.
False allegations.
But allegations were made, correct?
Right, I don't know who decided to come up with them, but they were blamed for me.
And they were never concluded to be false, were they?
We never went to court.
Right, because you left West Memphis before that happened.
Right, because the newspaper started coming out with this. I had already had prior experience with this before and what happened in Panama City Beach. There were false allegations. Somebody in the administration did whatever that was that they blamed me for. I didn't do it.
I'm going to direct you back to my question. You left before the allegations could be determined false, correct?
Right, and for some reason they didn't want me to talk about it. I was fine to talk about it.
All right, now let's look at your investigation of this case. You never went to Hockeytown, did you?
Not my investigation.
You never interviewed any witnesses?
I did not.
You spoke quite a lot about industry standards on your direct examination. So let me ask you this. Is it within industry standards to leave a woman lying unconscious on the ground for over an hour before an ambulance arrives?
Absolutely not. They know about it.
Sorry, what did you say?
If they know about it, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Now, you also spoke about how it's typically warned against to allocate all your resources to one place, right?
Typically, but there is an exception.
And you are aware that there's actually an exception to that exception. So if there are 200 or more people in a location, the city does have a duty to send police and EMS regardless of unprecedented gatherings.
If the anticipated number is more than 200.
Do you remember giving a statement in this case?
An affidavit, yes.
And in that affidavit, you swore to tell the truth just like today.
Correct.
I'm showing opposing counsel a copy of the witness's affidavit.
Can I see the back, please?
I have a copy for the witness. Is this your affidavit?
Hold on a second, ma'am. Actually, I believe this. Yes, you can go ahead.
Now, let me direct you to the second to last paragraph, towards the bottom. Read silently with me as I read out loud. The city's obligation to provide police and EMTs didn't kick in until there were at least 201 people, right?
Yes, that's what's written.
And so in that statement, you never said 201 anticipated people, but until there were 201 people.
Until there were an anticipated number of 201. Really, number is, in hindsight, more like 300, and the industry code has to draw a line somewhere.
Mr. Sneed, I wasn't asking you about the industry standard or drawing a line. My question was, in your definition of that standard in your statement, you didn't include anticipated or notification, correct?
I did not include that word.
Right. Now, you also spoke a lot about the locations of the two protests, right?
Yes.
And you claimed that the permits made it clear that they were in two different places.
Yes.
But there's also, on Cardin Carroll's application, the event name, Protest at Michael Jordan Statue, correct?
That's the name, which is objective identification and nothing else.
But it does say Protest at Michael Jordan Statue, yes?
That's the name.
And the Michael Jordan statue is in Center Park, correct?
Correct.
And Center Park is where Taylor Target's event was to be held.
Yes.
And one more thing. You do a lot of work for city safety planning, right?
Yes.
And you think that the city needs to make money no matter what.
It has to sustain itself, yes.
So that's a yes?
That's what I just said, yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Ma'am. Redirect. Ms. Seago.
Briefly, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Sneed, Ms. Perez just cross-examined you on the fact that, or concerning the attendance that was listed on the applications. Can you explain, I don't think she gave you the chance, can you explain why industry standards specifically say 201 and why it wasn't a concern of the cities to provide it at 200?
Right. The city did put the word anticipated on their permit, which meant that there could have been more or less. Industry code draws a line at 200 when the anticipated number is 200. Really, in hindsight, as I begin to explain, it's more like 300. Whether in hindsight it was more or less doesn't matter. What the expected number does matter, and therefore the industry standard does apply.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Recross.
Briefly, Your Honor. Now, you were just speaking about the 201 standard, but once again, when you define that standard in your statement, you said the obligation kicks in when there were 201 people, right?
I believe my definition is adequate to the answer I gave.
So that's a yes, when there were 201 people?
When they were anticipated.
But in your statement, you never said when there were anticipated, you said when there were.
I never said the word anticipated, but I believe this definition is adequate to the answer that I just gave Ms. Seago.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything else, Ms. Seago? Thank you, sir. You may step down. Defense, call your next witness, please.
Call the city manager, Celsius Swagger.
Mr. Swaggerwright, I remind you you're under oath.
May I step in the large before I begin, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
And, Your Honor, for the sake of time, can I move in the course of the examination if necessary?
Yes, ma'am. Anytime.
Mr. Swagger, I give you with this.
Yes.
Please state your name for the court.
Excelsior Swaggerite.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the city manager of Hockeytown.
How long have you held that position?
Since January 20th, 2017.
The city manager of Hockeytown, the first position of public office you've held?
No, I was previously the assistant city manager of Footballville for 5 years.
What do you do as city manager of Hockeytown? What are your responsibilities?
I'm the chief executive of the city and the leader of the city, which means my responsibilities are to manage the city's resources and its safety.
Mr. Swaggerite, I want to talk about your involvement with this case. First of all, are you familiar with the plaintiff, Ms. Cardin Carroll?
I am.
How so?
On August 1st, 2017, Ms. Carroll submitted an application to the city to hold a protest at a local city park.
Mr. Washington, I think your microphone's off.
Test. Good.
No deduction for that.
Can you remind me what the last question I asked you was?
You asked me how I knew Cardin Carroll.
Okay, could you explain that again?
Yes. On August 1st, 2017, Cardin Carroll submitted an application to the city to hold a protest at a local city park.
Now, why would Ms. Carroll have had to apply in order to host a protest?
Well, of course, Ms. Carroll has the freedom of assembly, but the application process is
What is your role in the application process?
I have to give my final stamp of approval on the application for it to be approved. If I do not approve it, it's not supposed to happen.
Would you recognize Ms. Carroll's application if I showed it to you?
I believe I would.
For the record, I'm referencing an enlargement of Exhibit I, which is already in evidence. Is this that application, Mr. Swaggerite?
It is.
Now, generally speaking, about applications for special event permits, what factors do you consider when deciding whether to approve it?
I consider all the information on the application. I do not consider all the information for the same purpose. I consider every piece of information for the purpose it is given.
And what decision did you make with Mr. Carroll's application? Ms. Carroll, excuse me.
With Ms. Carroll's application, I decided to approve it because nothing stood out to me as a reason I should say no.
Where did you think that Ms. Carroll's protest was going to be held?
Well, given that the event location was 123 Gator Street, I trusted that that was where the event would be held.
Mr. Swaggerite, do you have a copy of Exhibit A on the witness stand?
Exhibit A, this right?
Yes. In court today, is that the first time you're seeing Exhibit A?
It is. I've never seen this before.
Thank you, Mr.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance?
Your Honor, in the direct examination of Card and Carroll, opposing counsel pointed out the fact that Ms. Carroll hung these flyers at City Hall. That goes to notice. However, by asking Mr. Swaggerite right now whether or not he saw it, it denies that fact of notice. That is why it is relevant for the purpose of impeachment of opposing counsel's testimony.
Your Honor, if I may, when the exhibit was introduced on Ms. Carroll's examination, it was introduced with the intention of proving her intent to hold a protest at Center Park, the listed location on the flyer. It's not relevant whether or not Mr. Excelsior Swaggerite saw it. That was not an intent of the plaintiff to prove on the examination in which the exhibit was originally introduced.
May I respond?
No. When a exhibit is introduced, it's introduced for all purposes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Overrule the objection. You may proceed.
So have you seen this before?
Not before today.
Mr. Swaggerite, on the week of August the 1st, 2017, were there any other applications like this one that you approved?
Yes, there were many applications. All the events for Eclipse Day each had an application for it.
Did you receive an application from a Mr. Taylor Target?
I believe so.
Would you recognize that application if I showed it to you? For the record, I'm showing the jury an enlarged copy of Exhibit J. Is this that application, Mr. Swaggerite?
It is.
What decision did you make with Mr. Target's application?
I looked at Mr. Target's application. Nothing jumped out to me as a big reason I should not approve it, so I approved it.
Now, Mr. Swaggerite, it says family reunion on the event type, and the jury has already heard this. So I want them to be very clear. When people submit these applications, would a protest be the only kind of thing one would apply for?
No, every time you're using a public area or resource of any kind, you have to submit an application to the city.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Swaggerite, I want to talk about August the 21st, 2017, the day of the eclipse. In your words, what was Hockeytown expecting on Eclipse Day?
It's quite frankly going to be the biggest day in our history.
Why is that?
Well, because Hockeytown was one of the places on the entire planet where the path to totality line, that meant that we were going to be expecting thousands, possibly even tens of thousands of tourists from all over the country to be coming to our town.
And when you and your fellow city employees gained the knowledge that you could have tens of thousands of tourists coming, how did you respond?
I responded by immediately beginning the process of planning for this event.
What kind of plans did you make?
Well, as far as the events for the tourists, I organized 4 different singers and 3 different food truck companies to come to the downtown area where we were calling Center Stage.
Did you do anything to ensure that the people at Center Stage would be safe?
Yes, I ordered the police department, Chief of Police Andy Griffin, to have all officers on duty, which is normal, all 17 of them, and to direct the flow of traffic to Center Stage so that we would know where all the people were, and then to have all the police officers where those people were to keep them safe.
Well, let's break down that decision. How did you communicate this idea to the Hockeytown Police Department?
I sent them a memo.
And what exactly was your decision?
My decision regarding the...
Yes.
Like I said, was to have all police officers on duty, to direct the flow of traffic to Center Stage, and have all police officers at Center Stage to keep those crowds safe.
Now, Mr. Swaggerite, we've heard the plaintiff expert, Mr. Sylvester, try to criticize this decision for being negligent. But why did you make that choice?
I made that choice because I believed it was the only way for us to keep the tens of thousands of people safe. We had a very limited police force, and if I hadn't allocated all of them to that location, I would risk the safety of those people.
You mentioned earlier that one of your responsibilities as city manager is to manage your city's resources. For August the 21st, what resources did you manage?
Well, obviously managed all the resources, but I specifically dealt with electricity that I had to reroute from non-essential functions to power events at some stage.
What do you mean by non-essential functions?
For example, I disconnected from the grid some street lights that weren't going to be turned on anyway, but I needed them disconnected from the grid so that we would have the extra electricity at center stage.
Just so that this jury is clear, when you say you were directing electricity to the main square, were you literally turning power off at people's houses?
No, it was just a few street lights that weren't going to be on in the middle of the afternoon.
We've also heard the plaintiff's witnesses try to criticize this decision for being negligent. But why did you make that choice?
If I had not rerouted the electricity, I thought I could risk an electrical failure at the events at center stage, which could have hurt all the dense crowds right there.
Now, Mr. Swaggerite, have you been sitting in court today throughout the trial?
I have.
Right there in that chair at defense counsel table? I have. And have you been listening to the plaintiff attorneys and witnesses accusing you of being negligent?
I have.
I want the jury to hear it straight from you. With the information made available to you, did you do everything within your power as city manager to reasonably plan for safety on August 21st?
Absolutely.
No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Barnes.
Good evening. My name is Mackenzie Barnes, and I'll just be asking you a few questions. Now, you mentioned on your direct examination that you came into your current position, Hockeytown City Manager, in January of 2017?
January 20th, January 20th, 2017 is when I was sworn in.
And prior to that date, you hadn't worked in Hockeytown.
I had not worked in Hockeytown.
Prior to that date, you hadn't even lived in Hockeytown, right?
Well, I lived there while I was campaigning.
Right, which took place, and you won this campaign in November, correct?
Yes, so I was in Hockeytown for months leading up to the campaign. Obviously, I would be in Hockeytown campaign. Then months leading up to my being sworn into office, preparing.
Right. And after you were sworn in, after you took office, you began planning for the Eclipse Day events, didn't you?
Yes, almost immediately after I took office, I started planning these.
And you had in mind a grand marquee-like event for the city you'd just begun work in, didn't you?
Obviously, like I said, thousands of people were going to be descending on our town. It was simply going to be a marquee event. It was a fact, that wasn't an opinion. So the simple fact that there were going to be that many people in our city was going to be a marquee event.
Mr. Swaggerite, in the interest of time, I ask that you answer yes or no and then offer an explanation if necessary. Sure. So, a month into office, you started planning for a grand marquee-like event for Hockeytown?
Yes, that was the event. The event that I was planning.
Right, and when you took these plans you had in mind to the mayor, he wasn't as confident in them as you were, was he?
No, the mayor didn't like them, but that didn't really matter because, as I mentioned, I am the chief executive and the actual leader of the city.
It didn't matter that the mayor expressed reservations about the plans you had in store for Hockeytown?
No, because his reasons were opposed.
It didn't matter that the mayor said that you were stretching yourself and Hockeytown's resources too thin?
It didn't matter because of the reasons he gave, and obviously, since the mayor is not the real leader of the city, he does not have final authority. It's up to me at the end of the day to decide whether these are good decisions or bad decisions, not the mayor.
Right, so despite the fact that you had been in office for less than a month, and the fact that the mayor warned against the plans you had in mind, you continued with the preparations for Eclipse Day, didn't you?
Yes, it didn't take more than a month in office to realize that I was better at my job than the mayor was.
Right. Now, these plans included your traveling up and down the state of Tennessee from February to August of 2017, right?
Yes, I obviously wasn't away from the town the entire time, but I did take trips, obviously, to get the Board of Talamax and the food trucks.
Right. In addition to this travel, you were also coordinating with Hockeytown's marketing and budgeting offices?
Yes, I even went around to public schools to talk about it.
You were coordinating and hiring food trucks, vendors, musicians, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. I wanted to make this event as fun for the tourists and as profitable for the city as possible. So it'd be a win-win.
And in addition to all of this planning, you also had a potential $25 million revenue in line for these events, didn't you, Mr. Swagger, right? Yes. So amidst all of this planning, all of this potential revenue, you were still reviewing some permit applications, weren't you?
Obviously, yes. Not only these two that we talked about today, but as I mentioned, every single time we were looking at using a public area or resource, there was an application.
And you are the final approval on these applications, right?
Yes.
And the nature of the applications for permits is to ensure that events in Hockeytown are safe.
Yes.
Right? So surely you can tell this jury that you gave these essential applications more than just a glance, right?
Well, no, because obviously y'all have seen these. There's hardly any information on these documents, so it didn't take more than a glance to see what was there.
So yes, you were just glancing at the applications that you received?
I only glanced at the documents, yes, because that's all it took.
And you glanced at them because things were so busy and hectic at the time of August 21st, the time surrounding August 21st, that you didn't really have time for more than a glance, did you?
That was also a reason, and as I mentioned, not only did I not have time to investigate these like I'm Sherlock Holmes or something, but it doesn't take more than a glance to see what's on this piece of paper.
No, it appears that you have Exhibit I and J before you on the stand?
Yeah, I actually have these.
No, directing your attention to Exhibit J, is this one of the applications that you glanced at?
It is. It's Taylor Targets.
Right, and Taylor Targets, you reviewed this properly, didn't you? You can assure us of that.
Absolutely. I looked at every single piece of information, took it for what is intended, and made my decision accordingly.
So, looking at this information, Taylor Target listed event type family reunion.
He did.
And this family reunion was to be named an Airness Fan Club rally, held by organization Airness Fan Club. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And did you notice this when you were glancing at the applications?
Obviously, it didn't affect my decision that the event could go ahead, especially since there were no other applications approved for 123 Gator Avenue.
No, Taylor Target listed an email address, didn't he?
He did.
And he listed a phone number?
He did.
And you've indicated at the top of this document that you have the ability to reach out to the applicant if you have any questions regarding their information.
Yes, if there's any information that I need that's not there, then I can call Mr. Target or anyone who's applying to request further information. Obviously, as I approved this application, I didn't feel that was necessary.
Right, now, Taylor Target left a blank spot on his application, didn't he?
He did, because, go ahead.
A blank spot where the anticipated number of attendees was what you and the city had asked for, right?
Yes, we asked for an anticipated number of attendees. Mr. Target told us it was a family reunion. I felt that was enough. Obviously, Mr. Target did, so I approved it.
So you saw an application for a family reunion named Airness Fan Club Rally, hosted by organization Airness Fan Club, with no anticipated number of attendees listed, and you didn't give Taylor Target a call?
I didn't, because it's a family reunion. I'm not going to pester someone on how many people are going to be at their family reunion, given it's not going to be a ridiculous number.
No, Taylor Target also listed 123 Gator Avenue as his location, didn't he?
He did.
And that's the location of Center Park.
He did.
It's also the location of a Michael Jordan statue.
I believe so.
So directing your attention to Exhibit I, is that another application that you glanced at?
It is.
And that's the application submitted by Cardin Carroll, isn't it?
It is.
And Cardin Carroll's event name is Protest at Michael Jordan Statue.
That is the name.
Now, in addition to receiving this permit application from Cardin Carroll, you would agree with me that you did also receive a phone call from the plaintiff.
I did.
Right, but you don't remember what was discussed in that phone call?
No, I have no idea what either of us said.
Right, you received a phone call from someone who you knew to be holding a protest on the day in which Hockeytown was prepared to host thousands of other tourists. But you don't remember what was discussed?
No, it obviously wasn't that important, and I was extremely busy preparing for the eclipse. And also, I'd already approved the application and determined that Cardin Carroll's events were safe.
Now, let's talk about your preparations for August 21st regarding safety. You mentioned on your direct examination that it was your decision to deploy all police officers to Center Square on the day in question, right?
Yes.
You didn't deploy any police officers to Center Park.
No, there was no reason to.
You didn't allow for any police officers to be present anywhere in Hockeytown except for Center Square.
That's exactly right, because I needed all of my police officers to be where this extremely dense group of people were going to be. Otherwise, I risk their safety.
Regardless of the other residents of Hockeytown who may not have been in Center Square?
Regardless of the other residents?
Yes.
Yes, which is why we encouraged all our residents who wanted to be at the events. Obviously, if something terrible happened, we could get there.
You could get there, meaning officers could have reached anyone who called 911?
Officers don't pick up 911, but if 911 gives us a problem, obviously we respond.
Right, and the police officer who was dispatched by 911 would be expected to respond in a timely fashion, right?
Obviously, or he's probably going to lose his job.
Right. Now, in addition to deploying no police officers to Center Park, you also didn't station any medical personnel at Center Park?
No, because the only people that were supposed to be there for a family reunion, and I can't think of the last time a family reunion needed trained medical professionals from the city.
So in addition to no police officers, no medical personnel, on your order, Center Park also didn't have any electricity to power the streetlights. Is that correct?
Yes, and as I mentioned, it is the middle of the afternoon. It's not like the streetlights are going to be there.
Right, you said that Center Park streetlights were non-essential. Is that correct?
Yes, because it's the middle of the day.
Streetlights were not essential on the day of the total solar eclipse.
Yes, which, as I'm sure y'all are all aware, and I think this Joe may even mentioned it, only lasted a few seconds.
Yes, streetlights are not essential on a day in which, for a period of time, Hockeytown would be completely dark.
Well, not completely dark. I'm sure all of us from Dutch County, and we were there for the solar eclipse, probably we were all aware how dark it was, and it wasn't pitch black. It was dark, obviously a lot darker than it normally is.
Thank you, Mr. Swaggerite. Now, after having deployed no police officers, no medical personnel, and also diverting all electricity, on August 21st, you heard a commotion coming from Center Park, didn't you?
I heard about a commotion, and I think I may have heard some of the commotion, yes.
Right, and that was around 2:30, the time of the eclipse?
Yes.
And you learned that Cardin Carroll had been injured at Center Park, correct?
I did learn.
And your immediate suspicion was that you had made a mistake. Isn't that right?
Well, it wasn't a suspicion, it was an expectation. As the city manager, obviously, like I testified, it's my responsibility to try to keep my citizens safe. And so if a citizen gets hurt, my immediate reaction is to check my own work. And as I'm sure you read in my statement, after I checked my own work, I realized that there was nothing we could have done to prevent Mrs. Carroll's or Miss Carroll's.
Right, Mr. Swaggerite, so forgive me, you didn't suspect that you had made a mistake. You expected that you had made a mistake. Is that what you're testifying to?
No, what I'm saying is, when a citizen gets hurt, I immediately check my work first, because at the end of the day, the buck, as long as everything else is responsible, the buck stops with me. Now, obviously, after I check my work...
Thank you, Mr. Swaggerite. I believe our time today
Objection,
has
Your Honor. I'd like my witness to be able to answer Ms. Barnes' question.
Your Honor, the witness was being non-responsive, but additionally, the time has elapsed.
Time has elapsed. You can finish up your answer, though. Go ahead and finish up. Were you finished?
Yeah, I was just saying that I obviously checked my own work first to make sure I wasn't responsible for Miss Carroll's injuries, which I found I wasn't.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Barnes. Anything else?
Briefly. Now, Mr. Swaggerite, Ms. Barnes just asked you some questions about information made available to you prior to the events of August the 21st. I'm going to ask you just a few more. Did any of the information made available to you prior to Eclipse Day include the fact that Taylor Target's family reunion was actually going to be a violent counter-protest?
No, no information was given to me to indicate that.
Objection, Your Honor. This is an unfair extrapolation. May I call a constructive bench conference?
There's been some testimony about this family reunion not being a violent affair. You ever been to a family reunion down in Lewis County, Tennessee? All right, let's move on. Let's go to something else, okay?
Thank you, Your Honor.
One more question, Mr. Swaggerite. In Cardin Carroll's protest application, did she include the fact that she was going to try to pull down the Michael Jordan statue?
No.
Objection, Your Honor. This is outside the scope of my cross-examination. I never asked about Ms. Carroll attempting to pull down the statue.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, in Ms. Barnes' cross-examination of Excelsior Swaggerite, she asked many questions about Ms. Carroll's application. That is what my question is regarding. I simply asked him about the contents of Ms. Carroll's application, whether or not she included a certain piece of information. Therefore, it is within the scope of Ms. Barnes' cross-examination.
Overrule. Go
Yes,
ahead.
Your Honor.
In Ms. Carroll's protest application, did she include the fact that she was going to try to pull down the Michael Jordan statue?
She most certainly did not.
Thank you. No further questions.
I believe your time has expired. Thank you. Thank you, sir. You can step down.
No further proof, Your Honor. The defense rests.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Perez, are you ready to make your closing argument for the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. One moment while
My apologies to folks in the courtroom from Lewis County. I got a little... the hour's late, and you from Lewis County? Okay.
May I reserve up to 1 minute of my closing argument for rebuttal, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
"30 seconds can change a life. 30 seconds changed Cardin Carroll's life when the city of Hockeytown, Tennessee turned a blind eye to the reasonably foreseeable danger of citizen harm. They allowed violent counter-protesters to show up to Ms. Carroll's protest while providing no police officers, no medical personnel to deal with that violence, and no streetlights during a total eclipse. Cardin Carroll was left defenseless. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are here today to decide whether or not the city of Hockeytown, Tennessee is liable for the injuries that Ms. Carroll suffered while exercising her lawful right to protest. We, the plaintiff, have met our burden of proof. We have proven to you by a preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not, that the city of Hockeytown, Tennessee could reasonably foresee the danger. However, they negligently allowed Ms. Carroll's protest to occur under unsafe conditions, without having properly reviewed permit applications, without security, and without streetlights. Let's take a look at the evidence. Cardin Carroll, she's a law student. She knows what it takes to plan a safe and legal protest, so she filed an application for a permit. But it seems, ladies and gentlemen, that Ms. Carroll was the only one in this case who was willing to put in the time and the effort to ensure the safety of Hockeytown residents. You heard how important seconds are. So imagine if Excelsior Swaggerite had spent just a little more time instead of glancing at permit applications, instead of turning a blind eye to event names and event types, to posters and to the phone call that Cardin Carroll made. Ladies and gentlemen, that phone call was the most important piece of evidence you heard today. Cardin Carroll called the city to warn them of a potential for violence that we know today did come to pass. Now, Excelsior Swaggerite forgot about that phone call in the midst of the highly lucrative city-sponsored Eclipse events. He turned a blind eye to Ms. Carroll's fears, and she suffered the consequences. Now, even without that phone call, the city absolutely could have foreseen the danger of August 21st, 2017. Jordan Quinn told you herself that even regular citizens were concerned about the protest and rival counter-protest that they knew was going to happen. Sky Sylvester, expert in safety, took the stand and told you that a plain reading of the permit applications made it clear that 2 protests were to occur at the same time and location. And so the city had an obligation to provide proper police, EMS, to light the streetlights. But the city did none of this. Now, the city claims they had limited resources. They had to put them where it mattered most. But if you have limited resources and can't ensure the safety of everyone, you shouldn't allow for every event to occur. Now, Sammy Snead tried to convince you that the city was justified in leaving the protesters in the park without any safety resources at all. But Snead also said that the city's obligation to provide police and EMS kicked in when there were 201 people in that park. There were 1,000 people in that park, 2 blocks away from where the city manager and all of Hockeytown's police department stood. But they couldn't spare any safety resources. After all, there were food trucks to be managed back in the square. Snead also said that the city absolutely did not, and I quote, act within reasonable care in leaving Cardin Carroll unconscious on the ground for an hour. Absolutely not. And you heard about Snead's work history. She says that a city has to make money no matter what. You can't trust his expert opinions. Now, Lee Joe, who found Miss Carroll unconscious at the scene, said that there were no police around, no medical personnel. She had to call 911 3 times to be put on hold. For an ambulance to come an hour later, for a single police officer to wander up an hour later. The city easily could have foreseen the danger in an unlit, unmonitored, inaccessible protest and counter-protest, but city employees turned a blind eye. We ask that you find in favor of the plaintiff. Thank you.
Mr. Washington.
Yes, Your Honor. I want you to picture a college student who's walking through a library. And as he walks through the library, he carries with him a box of matches. And as he walks, he takes a match out of the box, lights it, and throws it in a random direction. He then repeats this action, then does it a 3rd time, a 4th time, and over again until the box of matches is empty. Some books on a bottom shelf catch fire. That fire spreads to other books, and eventually the entire library is ablaze. And the young man is injured as a result. But this college student turns around and sues the city that the library is located in. He says, oh, the fire department should have been there sooner to stop the fire before it got to me. The police should have been there to stop me from throwing the matches. As absurd as that story may sound, it's not all that different than the one that you've heard today. The protest at Center Park was a fire. And just like any fire that's not contained, it grew and grew until it was out of control. The question you're tasked with answering today is who started that fire? And when you look for the person who started the fire, look for the person who threw the match. Now, let's make one thing very clear. This is not our lawsuit. The burden of proof lied squarely on that table today. It was not our job to prove anything. But even if you find that it is just as likely that the plaintiff's own actions caused her injuries, then you have to find in favor of the city. So let's take a look at what the city's situation was. They've got this unprecedented gathering event coming up, the Eclipse, where tens of thousands of tourists are going to be in their city on one day. And during the midst of that, the 2 protest applications we've talked about all day came across the desk of the city manager. Now, sure, maybe in a perfect world, the city has a team of agents that perform full-scale surveys on all of these applications. But we don't live in a perfect world, and the law doesn't require that cities act in perfection. It only requires that they act reasonably. And it is not reasonable to expect a city to micromanage its citizens when they fill out paperwork. At a certain point, the city just has to trust that its citizens will provide them with accurate information. And through the proof today, you've seen that that did not happen. What the plaintiff did do is come into this courtroom today and try to accuse the city of being negligent for diverting power and for diverting their police force. Let's talk about what the city's options were. The city had a total of 17 police officers. That may be just a third of the people in this entire courtroom. And they needed those police officers to be at the main square because that's where the greater safety risk was, where the most people were going to be. Additionally, if the city hadn't diverted streetlight power away from Center Park in the middle of the day, the city would have risked a major electrical outage with thousands of tourists nearby. I'm sure some of you have been at this courthouse since the early afternoon when it was still bright outside. And you probably didn't realize that the street lights on the front steps of the courthouse were turned off. And the reason you didn't realize that is because it was in the middle of the day and the sun was shining. And that is the very fact that the plaintiff is trying to hinge their case on. Now let's take a look at the plaintiff's actions. She puts posters around town advertising a protest to show the town who really deserved a statue. A first match. She provided incorrect information on her protest application. A second match. She shows up at the protest knowing that her protest group had a violent past interaction with the Airness fan club. Another match. And finally, the plaintiff picks up a rope, ties it around the Michael Jordan statue, and tries to pull it down with violent counter-protesters waiting in the wings. When it comes down to it, today's case is simple. The plaintiff threw every match and made that fire at Center Park blaze. And if anything blinded the city, it was the fire that Cardin Carroll created. We're not here today to make light of the plaintiff's injuries, but we're also not here to make light of what the law requires. And what the law requires is that cities act reasonably. If anyone acted unreasonably in today's case, it was the plaintiff. You must find in favor of the city. Thank you.
You have 5 seconds.
Thank you, Your Honor. First, I would like to say that though we are not allowed to object during a closing argument, we may reserve that objection for after. And I would object to the fact that it was not brought into evidence that Cardin Carroll and Taylor in the Airness fan club had a violent history. I believe that information was sustained in an objection and stricken from the record.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Nah.
5 seconds.
Very briefly. I'll give you 30 seconds. Right?
What'd you say?
30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds?
You only have 5, so I'm giving you about 25 extra.
Wait, I'm sorry. So I have 30 seconds for my rebuttal. Thank you, Your Honor. Cardin Carroll wasn't lighting matches and throwing them randomly. She called the city and warned them about a potential for conflict. The city forgot. The city turned a blind eye. You must find in favor of the plaintiff. Thank you.
We are going to take a brief recess while the jury deliberates its decision in this case.
Everyone stay in position, please, and allow the judge and jury to leave. All rise.